The most dangerous moment in Cleopatra's life wasn't when she died. It was when she was about to lose everything. Before the alliances, before the power, before Rome feared her, Cleopatra was a young ruler who had already been pushed out of her own kingdom. By the time she was in her early 20s, she wasn't sitting on a throne. She was in exile, forced out by her own brother, cut off from power, from wealth, from the system that had made her family rulers of Egypt for generations. And at that moment, Cleopatra wasn't a legend. She was a problem that was about to disappear, because in the ancient world, losing your throne didn't just mean losing power, it usually meant losing your life. Her brother Ptolemy III had taken control of Egypt, backed by advisors who saw Cleopatra as a threat, not a partner. Their rule was supposed to be shared, but in reality, it never was. Cleopatra was older, more experienced, and far more capable, which made her dangerous, so they removed her. And once she was gone, the expectation was simple. She would fade out of history, quietly, permanently. But Cleopatra didn't disappear. She adapted. And what she did next is one of the most calculated moves in ancient history. At the same time Cleopatra was in exile, Rome was collapsing into civil war. Julius Caesar had just defeated Pompey, his greatest rival, and chased him all the way to Egypt. Pompey arrived first, seeking refuge. But instead of helping him, the Egyptian court made a decision that would change everything. They had Pompey killed. And when Caesar arrived, they presented him with Pompey's severed head as a gift. They thought it would impress him. It didn't. Caesar was furious, not because he supported Pompey, but because the act was brutal, political, and short-sighted. And now, suddenly, Caesar was in Egypt, with an army, in a country already unstable, with a leadership he didn't trust. This was the moment Cleopatra had been waiting for. Because while her brother controlled Egypt, Caesar controlled the future. And Cleopatra understood something most rulers didn't. Power isn't just about armies, it's about timing. She needed access to Caesar, not a message, not a negotiation, a direct meeting. But there was one problem. She was banned from the palace. Her enemies controlled the city. If she was seen trying to enter, she could be killed before she even got close. So she did something no one expected. She had herself smuggled into the palace, not with an army, not with a public entrance, hidden, carried in, according to later accounts, inside a bundle of fabric, delivered directly to Caesar's quarters. Think about that for a second. Cleopatra didn't wait for permission. She didn't negotiate from a distance. She put herself physically into the presence of the most powerful man in the world at that moment, knowing that if it failed, she would die. That wasn't seduction, that was strategy. When Cleopatra met Caesar, she didn't just introduce herself, she presented a solution. Egypt was unstable, her brother's rule was weak, the country was divided, and Caesar needed stability. He needed Egypt's grain supply, he needed wealth, he needed control without chaos. Cleopatra offered him all of it, not as a favor, as an alliance, and Caesar accepted. What followed wasn't immediate victory, it was conflict. Civil war broke out in Alexandria. Caesar's forces were outnumbered. The city turned into a battleground. At one point, Caesar himself was nearly trapped inside the palace complex. Fires broke out across the city. The famous Library of Alexandria may have been damaged or partially destroyed during this chaos. This wasn't a clean political move. It was a risk that nearly failed. But in the end, Cleopatra's side won. Her brother drowned in the Nile while trying to escape, and Cleopatra was restored to power, not as a symbolic ruler, as the Queen of Egypt, backed by Rome's most powerful general. That moment changed everything, because from that point forward, Cleopatra wasn't just a local ruler. She was a player in Roman politics. She had influence, she had protection, and most importantly, she had proven something critical. She could turn a losing position into power. That's what made her dangerous. And it's also what history tends to simplify or ignore. Because the version most people hear is that Cleopatra seduced Caesar, that she used charm, beauty, or manipulation to gain power. But that version removes the strategy. It removes the risk. It removes the intelligence required to pull off what she did. Cleopatra didn't stumble into power. She engineered it. She understood timing. She understood perception. And she understood that aligning herself with Rome didn't mean submission. It meant influence. And that influence extended far beyond Caesar. After Caesar's assassination, Cleopatra aligned herself with Mark Antony, another powerful Roman figure. Together, they controlled vast territories, resources, armies. For a time, they represented a real challenge to Octavian, the man who would become Augustus. This wasn't a love story, it was a political alliance that threatened the future of Rome itself, which is exactly why Rome couldn't allow Cleopatra's true story to survive. Because if Cleopatra was remembered as a strategist, as a ruler who challenged Rome and nearly succeeded, that creates a different narrative, one where Rome wasn't inevitable, one where resistance was possible. So the story changed. Cleopatra became a seductress, a distraction, a cautionary tale. Because that version is safe. The real version is not. The real version is a young ruler, forced into exile, who took one of the biggest risks imaginable and turned it into power that reshaped the ancient world. And if that's the part of her story that gets minimized, you have to ask why. Because history doesn't just remember what happened, it remembers what survives. And sometimes the most important parts are the ones that almost didn't.